So we've heard a lot of things that have to do with startups and VC and dreams of the future, everything being different. That's sort of the theme of a lot of the discussion around this, reinventing the world. All wonderful, but you know, there's a lot of real world already, and a lot of the real world is thinking about these things too, and beginning to act on them. And I think that that is, from historical example, but also from common sense, perhaps the most important set of actors. So we have people here who are thinking about this, making things happen, but are coming from a position where they are parts of large organizations that have the ability to throw people and mind share and capital at things. So why don't we start just in order here and go through it, okay? So Nikki Robinson from IBM.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Nikki, security architect by day, adjunct professor by night, teaching everything from security architecture to statistical analysis. So I have that sort of unique blend of practitioner, security stuff, and from the researcher side.
Good. And what do you see? I mean, tell us about Web3. What are you guys doing?
So
tell me who you are, right?
Okay. Well, so
how are you going to change the world? You just heard, for instance, people talking about privacy and security as being the biggest problem. That was the previous thing.
Yeah.
So how are you going to fix that?
So from just an overall view, right, security is obviously top of mind because I see too often, like we think about IoT devices, things like that, the tech comes first. The ability to actually build this stuff comes first, and then we think about security second, and as was mentioned before, privacy. So I'm always thinking, how are we actually going to secure this? And specifically, there's lots of different types of blockchains out there. They're all built on different types of languages, and I'm always thinking about DevSecOps. So how are we actually building this stuff? And are we building with security by design?
Okay, so this is, let me say something, don't take it the wrong way. So this is sort of the same sort of problems you've been doing, but in this whole new area.
Right, right.
Okay, just bringing discipline to it.
Right.
It could probably use some discipline. Okay. Mohamad.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Sandy. And thank you all for having me here. So I run a company called IDG. Who here, raise your hand if you've ever heard of IDG. All right.
We all know IDG, come on.
That's great, that's
Guys
great. Well, you know, there's some younger people here too, not just us, right? So IDG's been around for 58 years. We're headquartered in Needham, Massachusetts. And we operate two large subsidiaries. One's called IDC. Has anybody heard of IDC? Okay, that's good. And then the other one is sort of a new brand called Foundry. Foundry used to be our media publications like CIO Magazine, Macworld, PC World, and so forth. You know, so what's irrelevant to Web3 to our company? Well, first of all, what IDC does is we do a lot of technology forecasts, right? And we've done this for 58 years. You know, all the big tech vendors use us to do their forecasts. And so I'll start with a forecast. So, you know, we measure the market, we look at market growth rates, et cetera. And you know, we estimate that the blockchain-based market's about $6.6 billion today. It's growing at 48%. So lots of opportunity for everybody here. There's a lot of use cases in the enterprise space. You know, some of the things like that IBM's doing on supply chain with Maersk, financial services. And these use cases are really quite excellent, right? Because they solve some of the problems that we couldn't solve before, like security and financial transactions and so forth. Other of these use cases are potentially highly problematic, especially some of these consumer use cases. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about these consumer use cases and what this could, the impact that this could have on our society at large. So I'll not do that. But I'm going to flip over to our Foundry side, which used to be, like I said, an advertising platform primarily. Today it's about 10% that. And now it's a platform that connects enterprise buyers and enterprise sellers. Why does this matter? because there are a few ways of connecting buyers and sellers, right? And there are big companies that do this: Salesforce, HubSpot, et cetera. The technologies that underpinning a lot of this stuff are cookies to connect buyers and sellers, and you guys all know that cookies have come under a lot of fire, right? And in some ways, they're going to be useless soon. There's this other thing called bitstream, which is also very porous, and security has all kinds of security problems. There's a bill in Congress to regulate the bitstream. And then there's first-party relationships, right, which is what our platform is based on. And it turns out that the first-party relationships is essentially what Web3 is based on. So there's a tremendous opportunity there for all you guys here to start the next Salesforce, the next HubSpot, the next company based on these first-party relationships. And so that's another interesting use case. So I will pause there, Sandy, and pass it back to the next.
Yeah, I think that there are two things. One is this first-party use case. So basically, how do you connect services and goods to people when the people control most of the data? It's not in some central repository. It's a whole different way of doing things. You have to rethink whole industries, large parts of the economy. But let me take issue with your $6 billion. So you talked about Maersk and the fact that 60% of all shipping in the world now is on their TradeLens blockchain. So that $6 billion must be like what they're paid to do it, and not the fact that it's like $2 trillion worth of shipping that is recorded on that.
Yes, that's right, Sandy. And I actually brought the IDC report if anyone wants to see it.
There we are. Okay.
But that's right. It is the products that it's like the tech products, right? It's like what IBM is selling to Maersk, not the fact that on this platform there are trillions of dollars of transactions and shipping happening.
Yeah. So to me, that's huge in terms of the sort of public relationship of or perception of blockchain. It's not just the $6 billion, it's the trillions of dollars, right, that are being managed this way. And again, it's like that first-person relationship. You're beginning to manage things in a very different way that hopefully is more privacy-preserving, secure, blah, blah, blah. Great. Okay. So Tareq.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So I flew yesterday from Tokyo, Japan, to be here, and I must say this is just an amazing day to pick to be
amazingly
here.
Healthy for having done that. Yeah.
So I work for a very, very large company called Rakuten. Now, Rakuten is an internet services company. Started in 1997 as e-commerce. Today, it's the largest e-commerce platform in Japan. Almost 3% of Japan GDP actually goes through our ecosystem. So we're into fintech services, travel, e-commerce. But I want to tell you today, the part that excites me the most isn't necessarily the traditional commerce business, is why I moved to Japan. Well, primarily the reason is to take an opportunity that I think has a significant impact on society and humanity, which is changing the underlying architecture for the basics of connectivity. So we're all here today talking about Web 3.0, but I seldomly never hear anybody ask a question. How telecom networks are built, by the way. If I take you with me to see and observe the architecture of connectivity across the world, I think many of you would be surprised, because all of us consume just data, IP, internet bits, but we never really imagine and think about the possibility of how this architecture is built. I call it, in a very simple terminology, it's been since 1981, when the first mobile 1G was invented till today. It's a forklift operation, taking legacy hardware, replacing it with new hardware, but there is no business of software. The software essence just doesn't exist. So, I've always had this dream, and the dream is, if the project is big enough, you will find me that I want to do it. So before Rakuten, I did a 4.5-year assignment in India building another greenfield mobile operator for a big company called Reliance Industry. But then I went to Japan with a dream. I found a company that really is willing to take a risk. I had an idea that, frankly speaking, 4 years ago was an idea on PPT, which is, can we build a connectivity architecture, focus on offering 4G, 5G, and future 6G connectivity that purely lives on software, and if you're a developer, truly embraces the essence of decentralized security architecture, decentralized connectivity, decentralized billing, and make sure that we move away from this proprietary implementation of hardware-specific to a pure software architecture in the network. And so I run 2 businesses today. So I'm the CEO of Rakuten Mobile, which is really, I wanted to use Rakuten Mobile as the first living lab, if you will. And then my other company is the CEO of Rakuten Symphony, which is the platform company, a platform that is really intended with one objective: to change the paradigm of why 3 billion people in the earth today are completely offline. And we don't think about that, right? So we talk about Web 3.0 and its advantages. So we took a pragmatic approach, which is, let us first of all decompose the connectivity architecture in the first phase. And then once we decompose it, let's make this a social mission and a social purpose. Let's give this to the world. So we started in Japan, and now the next big project I'm doing is in Europe, in the heart of Germany, to build and replicate what we have done in Japan. And yeah, so this is really the story of what I've been doing the last 4 years. And then the essence and the heart of everything that we do, of course, Web 3.0 technology is embedded into the architecture of providing the basics of connectivity.
So that's really great. So some years ago, I chaired AT&T's data board. And one of the goals was to have an all-software network. Yeah. And everybody said, oh, that's right, because it's amazing how that changes the business model. It really is, right? Because there's a lot of legacy hardware that doesn't really do what you want in lots of ways, that constrains it. But I have to say I was disappointed that AT&T never really made it all that way. So I hope what you do is you inspire people to finally kick the old architectures and move to this, because they're going to have to keep up with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Chris.
Hey, good morning. Chris Kay. I'm with M&T Bank, which is a $210 billion regional bank, 156 years old in Buffalo, New York. And what's interesting about the context for that is, our mission is actually to be the best community bank at scale. I'm just going to build right with what you said. What I observe happening, in the banking industry is there's certainly some large-scale banks that are sort of restacking, But I'd argue the preponderance of innovation approaches in the Web3 space in the banking industry is largely, trying out new capabilities on old architecture. And the thing that I observe, whether it's an institutional client who wants us to build a smarter, cheaper, faster, or more transparent capability in the trust business, or fundamentally customers who want to understand whether or not they have the literacy or know-how to enter into some new markets or new digital assets, I think the thing that I see happening here is that fundamentally the real work being done in financial services is rooted on real use cases that are oriented towards the client. So in all of the conversations today, as I think about the partnering opportunities that we have at M&T and how and how banks generally are responding to this, I think we're pretty early in the experimentation mode. And I think the preponderance of banks, both banks I would argue in healthcare as well, where things are pretty, where it's old architecture, let's put it that way, where I spent some time, is going to really be rooted in ecosystem plays and partnerships, Andy, that are rooted in real sort of human outcomes and client impact.
So we were talking about this yesterday because we do work together. So this focus for you on communities is really unusual. Banking for the last 30 years has all been about making things uniform, centralized, efficient. But of course, every community is different, which means the needs of the communities, the individual communities, are ignored. And we see a lot of that in the inequality problems that we have today. And if you can move to something that's like a Web3 thing, but based on different communities, so the communities own their data, the communities work with centralized facilities like your bank to figure out what is possible and how to move forward, but they have much more agency and control over their data. And I think that's a really interesting model. And you wouldn't necessarily describe that as Web3, but it's communities, people owning their data, making transactions with people that help them do that. But it is having that same sort of spirit, I think.
And I think it allows us actually to think beyond this sort of false trade that it's either central or local, and there's a cost model that's associated with either. Mm-hmm. And if you can actually think about creating a platform at a local community level and understanding the drivers of community financial health and other health in that sort of ecosystem, that social capital ecosystem, it is actually a really interesting Web3 use case.
Yeah, great. So let's go through again and sort of ask another question, which is, what do you think are the biggest effects, challenges, things that we ought to all be thinking about? You want to start again?
Sure. I mean, of course, I have to put my security hat on. I just always think about not just how are we actually integrating security if we're actually going to be adopting Web3, and this is, across the industry, right? But also, do we have the right people managing it with the right skill sets? I think that's one of the challenges right now is, do we have enough people with the right skill sets out there that understand, I'll go back to the languages of blockchain as just a really good, interesting case there. Do we have people with the right skill sets that can come in and not just help us sort of build this program or this integration, but can we maintain over time? So I think about scalability. How are we going to sort of get started, but what does that mean in 5 years from now? Are we prepared for what it's going to mean to our specific business?
So this is a general problem of, like, okay, the people in the room here are sort of sophisticated, know a lot about this. I may not do it all, but the general population doesn't have a clue about a lot of this, and also doesn't have the options of getting involved in it, the opportunity. And I think that's sort of like educating people, bringing the culture up, making people aware of it is just a major problem with this, right? Do you want to?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I would say one of the biggest challenges is fairness. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But, I think for everybody in this room, you will see a lot of opportunity in Web3. It's not a passing fad. There's going to be a lot of wealth to be created, and you guys are all going to be part of that wealth creation in some ways. My suggestion is that, when you're old like me, right, be proud of what you did. And fairness matters in that. So why am I on this path? Earlier I talked about how we are shifting and preparing ourselves for Web3 in that, we have exited cookies, we've exited Bitstream. We're probably one of the largest platforms to completely exit from the Bitstream, and we're primarily focused on first-party relationships because Web3 is going to be a first-party relationship. But think about it, if these first-party relationships are created in the metaverse, somebody's going to be controlling that metaverse, right? And so this idea of direct peer-to-peer with no intermediary, I just don't think that's true. And so this will come back to fairness. And we've been looking at the tech industry for 60 years now, and we've seen many of these new technology waves and the results of it. But I'm going to go back, just even a little bit further, right? So railroads were supposed to be the great connector for America. Social media, the great connector for the world, right? And a couple of decades after, railroads became ubiquitous, that's not what they were. What they were is they're putting their small businesses out of business in favor of large businesses. And so there was monopolistic regulation that was required. And this happened over and over. The oil industry, now, we're dealing with social media. And so this is going to be a tremendous wave that Web3 is going to create. We're all going to benefit out of it. And I think what we have to think about is there a way to make this technology wave a little bit more fair compared to prior adoption?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So fairness, inclusion, also this notion of empowering people and avoiding centralization. A lot of people are very worried about re-centralization it starts off that way, but as you said, the people that designed the wallets, the people that designed the platform, they end up controlling things in a way that may be unacceptable and defeats the whole purpose, right? So you want to talk about your vision?
I think for me personally, I would tell you that my challenges were not about the technology. I never thought, even though the technology was at that time was not mature, was not ready, I wasn't worried about our ability to execute, to deliver on the building blocks that we need to build this new software-defined network. The thing that I got super obsessed about is the composition of culture and organization. And I did not want to outsource my recruitment process. So I became very obsessed about how we build the right team, how we build the right organization, and the composition between what at the time I called subject matter experts, fresh grads, partnership that we need to do with academia. And so if you consider that Tokyo, by the way, English isn't necessarily today a common spoken language. It's difficult to communicate in language. Now, Rakuten have taken a very, very difficult choice and made English to be the standard communication language in the company in Japan. So in the last few years, this project has become a very attractive hub for many students across the world, many professionals that want to do something different. You talked about maybe AT&T and others. We furnish an opportunity to dream about what is the possibility. So in about a year and a half, about 66 nationalities relocated to Tokyo with their families. So we build a culture that is really obsessed about this mission and the dream, almost to the point, I would tell you, the company itself became obsessed about no plan B option. We need to make this work. There is no plan B in a way. So yes, there are challenges, but the technology aspect, so far I could tell you every hurdle that we faced, we solved. But I think what we have really achieved as a big disruption, yes, I'm excited about the technology, but a bigger disruption is the construct of the organization and how we linked experienced individuals with people that are just graduating from universities and finding them extremely effective on how we make them to do practical things around Web 3.0. So so I think this is really for us was a big thing about culture and organization.
Yeah, it's really, people don't appreciate what a difficult problem that is. Again, when I was at AT&T, I was just advising them. Their big challenge was culture. They had a business that had been running for 100 years, and everybody knew exactly what they were supposed to do, except now they had to do something different. And the culture, the organization, everything needed to change, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to.
Exactly.
Interesting little factoid: AT&T has more levels of management than the U.S. government. Oh my. Okay. Chris.
Yeah, I'll stay in this sort of space around purposeful mission. I think one of the I was recalling in 2010 I was one of the first healthcare blockchain conferences and made the proposition that there's more to this meeting than tech. There's longevity and inclusivity. There's improving lives, reducing amputations, healthy babies, and I think that notion of culture is really critical because I would posit that M&T and hopefully more broadly the financial services industry is interested in solving real problems, both to reduce cost and drive efficiency, but also to create access to make the experience simple and easy. Esther Dyson kicked off in the meeting this morning, sharing the 170 pages that it took to get a mortgage for her home. Like basic use case, but the access and the barrier to getting home ownership for Esther is probably small compared to what we might imagine to be a simplified way to help people access credit, securitize other forms of assets, and actually achieve a life. I think that fundamentally that's the message that we as partners of this community need to continue to stay on.
That's great. So one last quick thing, and then we go on to the next panel. you all come from a very sort of Western-centric. I know you're in Japan, but that's part of the sort of Western coalition. Not everybody in the world has the same attitudes about this. And like, for instance, just recently there was a news article about all of the BRICS, so Brazil, India, Russia, China, getting together to create a reserve currency. And we know that they already have a Web3 platform out of China and so forth. What do you think is going to happen in the world? What is the world going to look like in terms of sort of basic technology? Today, the technology runs pretty much the same way everywhere in the world. This may be a historical accident. Are we going to end up in a really fragmented world with very different types of platforms that we run in?
Well, I could tell you. I mean, unfortunately, if we don't have enough time to tell you about my background stories, but I feel sometimes I live like a 007 movie. I've worked for.
You dress like a 007.
Thank you very much. So I've worked for a Chinese company before. I worked for a U.S. company. I worked for a Japanese company in specifically very sensitive communication areas.
Right.
And I'm in the heart of probably a very complex geopolitical issue. You know, if you look at what we are building, you know, you'll hear in the news that Rakuten Symphony is competing now against Huawei, Huawei being a very large telecom infrastructure vendor in Japan. I'm in China. So this is a very, very complex world that we live in. It is now becoming extremely clear that the world is already divided. It is extremely clear, and it's very, very unfortunate that we are where we are today. You know, in terms of the basics and the foundation of the technology, even if you look at the fight around 5G and 6G, who has the ability to define standards, for example, and the standards will define how this communication will work worldwide. So I would say some things would be, we have no choice but to unite, meaning globally as through one communication forum. And some other things, we're going to be divided on the technology approach. It's just becoming a very, very factual thing that the world is already, you know, drawn its territories, and this is where we are today.
Yeah, I completely agree, by the way. And I'd just like to add, I mean, you know, over the last several hundred years, I mean, we've seen whoever controls technology sort of controls the world, right? And so England didn't control all the gold in the New World, right? But they had better ships, and they were able to sink, better technology. They were able to sink all those Spanish galleons, and they went on to be this little tiny island, from this little tiny island to controlling 1/4 of the world's population, including, you know, my ancestors, right? And so maybe your ancestors too. And so it's incredible the power technology's got, and we see that here today as well. I think what we're seeing in terms of the world is that there's a new power center of technology, and that's China. And there will be some sort of divided world here in terms of you know, more than there has been before. And I think in some ways we have to prepare for that. Many of the companies that we work with have a sort of China strategy and China ecosystem strategy and a non-China strategy and ecosystem strategy. And so I think we will see that going forward, and we need to prepare for it.
I think one of the things that is particular is it's not just China. So China, for instance, is the largest trading partner of most countries in Africa. Is the largest trading partner of many countries in South America. And of course, that means that those countries are likely to adopt what standard? Let's think about this. We're out of time. Do you have anything like?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I love their answers, yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you all. This has been great.
Thank you.